All right, so far we've been looking at the database level. So this is what is presumably going to contain our data. We can even see that there's a browser-based query editor that we can then connect with our username and password into to see the database. But before we do that, we want to look at the server. So we go to the overview screen. We can see that this is the server that we created. We could also go back to our resource group to look at the server as well, but I'm just going to click on this server name. It'll take me up to the server level. So the server is basically that is the place that hosts the database. And if I go over down to settings and SQL databases, we can see that there's only one database attached to the server. If we had them not as single databases, but in a pool, the pool would be under Elastic Pools. Now, in this particular case, remember I've told you before that database servers are protected by firewalls. We can see the show firewall settings right off the overview screen. And we did enable Azure, other services within Azure to access this server. But if we want another machine to access this server, like our local computer, we're going to need to basically whitelist this. So in order to do this, we're going to basically have to add a rule to say that our home computer, our work computer, our corporate network is going to be allowed to access this. Now, very conveniently, Azure is telling me what my IP address is. So this is the IP on which I am accessing the portal right now. And if I wanted to whitelist my computer to access this, there's this Add Client IP button here as well. And I click it, and it basically added my local IP whitelist. So again, if your IP is not in this range, you are not going to be able to access this SQL database. And that might be perfectly fine for 99.99999% of the world that you don't want to access your database. But if your applications are, let's say your applications are mobile apps and they're going to access the database directly without a service in between, then you might have to have it wide open so the entire internet can access it. But right now, this is a firewall. We have to whitelist it. I'm going to whitelist my own IP address in order to access it. So that's sort of a mandatory right now in order for us to work with this. Okay, so the firewall settings are here. We could also connect this to our Active Directory, which is not connected. So if you don't want to set individual user IDs and passwords to log into the server, we can actually connect it to Active Directory. We can have service accounts for those applications, etc. Okay. If we go back to SQL databases and we navigate back to the database that we want to work with, right now this database does not have any tables on it. There's no way for us to insert data. We can go into the query editor, and if I was to actually provide my password here, log in, we can see that there's nothing here. Now, this isn't a very convenient way to work with SQL Server. Even if you had it on your local, if you had a web interface like this to work with it, it would be very inefficient. So coming up, we'll talk about how else we can access this SQL Server.